PNR with Adam R. Welcome to 3PNR. I'm your host, Adam R. And joining me again is Julie Ann Fidler from the True Crime Blogger. Julie, your blog, by the way, I'm going to put that in description so people know what's the platform. They can just find it using Google, right?
Yeah, it's on Medium, but if you just put in the True Crime Times, it's the first thing that pops up on Google.
Got it. Julie, let's start out with, we were talking in pre-podcast here about the Delphi. Give me information on that, what you know so far.
Well, there's been a lot going on. A lot of it's kind of been overshadowed by the Idaho student murders. But just to recap, 2017, the girls, Abby and Libby were out walking along the Monon High Bridge in Delphi, Indiana, which is it's like a nature trail, essentially, a very dangerous nature trail. But anyway, it was a unusually warm day. It was the day before Valentine's Day, and they just wanted to get out and enjoy the weather. And when it came time to pick them up in the afternoon, they didn't show up. And then the next morning, they were found murdered. So just to give some background for people who might not be familiar.
Right.
For 5 years, it seemed like the case was going cold. They would get a lead, and the lead would lead to nowhere, and there was confusion because there were two separate composite sketches that were given to the media. But in the fall, thank God, they actually arrested someone that they believe either committed the murders or is part of the murders. I don't think they're quite sure that he did it on his own. But the crazy thing about this person that they arrested is that he was on the map from pretty much day one. And he actually spoke to the police right after it happened and told them he was on the bridge that day. He was there at the same time. He told them what he was wearing, which, as it turned out, resembled what the bridge guy. There was some Snapchat video of this man following the girls. And what he described to the police was what was seen in this video. And then for 5 years, he just fell off the map. Supposedly, it was because of an FBI error. But they finally arrested him. His name is Richard Allen. He's 50 years old. He was just an employee at the local CVS in town. And so people were familiar with him. Certainly not somebody that they ever thought would be involved in something like this. And actually, I forget if it was Abby or Libby's family, when they went to develop photos for the memorial service, he was the one who actually waited on the family and developed the photos. And then when he gave the photos to them, when they came to pick them up, he said there's no charge. And so, like everybody else, they just thought he was this nice, normal guy. And here, this is the person that they think, killed their family member.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. How old are these girls at this time? They're young, right? 20s?
Oh, no, they were teenagers. Libby German was 14 and Abby Williams was 13.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. And, any information that's, been put out there, most of it has come from, leaks from people who were part of the search or, people who found the bodies. And so there's all sorts of rumors out there. Not all of them have been confirmed, but, one of the things that has been circulating was that, they said from the very beginning, law enforcement said that the killer or killers took like a sort of like a prize from them, something to, I know that's not the word I'm looking for, but something, to like remember the
Like a
crime.
trophy.
And yeah, so what's been circulating was that he took a pair of panties belonging to one of the girls, and one of their cell phones.
Were those items recovered that you know of?
Well, the one cell phone was recovered, and that's where they actually got the Snapchat video from.
Ah,
They were taking, pictures of each other. It was a nice day and posting them on Snapchat and stuff. And thank God they had the wherewithal to actually video this guy who was following them. And that, without that, I don't know if they ever would have found the guy.
right. So it's starting to sound like that's the evidence that linked them.
Right. Like Libby filmed this man following them. And, at one point he says, guys down the hill. And we now know that they found a bullet casing near the bodies that it hadn't been fired, but had been, excuse me, circulated through a gun that was traced back to Richard Allen. It's his gun. So, it hasn't been confirmed, but the overall assumption is, he had to have used a gun to maybe scare them
Right.
into going down the hill. But we know that they were not shot. That's not how they were killed.
Right.
So
Because in the crime itself, I mean, did it seem premeditated, or was it that, opportunity knocked for this guy? Because there's no way he sees two young girls and it decides in that moment, I'm gonna murder these two. I'm gonna do something to them and I'm gonna murder them.
right.
It's go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to say that the situation is confusing, because now, before the arrest, they arrested a man named, he had this account on Instagram. It was a fake account, and it was the Anthony Shots account. And the account featured photos from it. It just looked like an attractive teenage boy.
Right.
But it turned out that the photos actually belonged to a professional model and not associated with the account at all. And the person behind that account he's currently sitting in jail because they found like child pornography and such on his devices. And he was using that account so that he could meet underage girls. His name is Anthony Klein. And he was meeting underage girls. They assume meeting underage girls, getting videos, getting photos and such. And they do know that he was not the only person who had access to the account, not the only person who had the password. Supposedly his father had it. And they know that the Anthony Klein, or whoever's, they think it's him, but if there might have been somebody else behind the account, but that account interacted with one of the girls.
I see.
And so, yeah. And so now I don't know that there's been anything else released about that, but, the rumor is that it was some sort of sex ring, and this was some sort of botched kidnapping, and how, this guy has anything to do with like how they're connected, how they met, how they know each other. That's what, that's like the big question right now is
it
how
sounds
involved
to me,
was that?
Yeah, it sounds to me like an unfortunate coincidence, because this guy that killed him, it can't be that this is his first time killing, right? Because the likelihood he's walking on a trail, sees two young girls, decides in that moment, I'm going to do this. It doesn't sound right. It sounds to me like he's done this before. Now, whether or not he confesses that or they discover that, that's, question mark. But
right,
it's just, not every human being just, there's I forget the name, the Inside Man the show's watching, and the guy in the show says, everyone's capable of murder, just depends on, the situation. Right.
Sure.
And so this guy obviously was behaving like a predator, following them. The girls clearly felt uncomfortable if they recorded him. And yeah, he had to have had experience before to even take that next step. Otherwise, if it's because so his demeanor and some of the video I looked at, he didn't seem to me to be like overly concerned or shocked. It's almost like a ham got.
Right.
And you see that's exhibited on serial killers too. They have that same display in their face, like, all right, they got me. So
yeah, and I think it's safe to assume that the girls were specifically targeted and that it was a planned attack because there were numerous witnesses on the bridge that day, including other young girls who spotted him and described him to the police. And so why didn't he go after them? Why did he follow Abby and Libby?
Right.
So I think it's unlikely that it was just random.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he probably, like any other predator, whether it be a predator of the wild or a predator amongst humans, they choose their prey by weaknesses, right? They like when lions approach a herd, they look for the weaker one, the slower one, the one that's easier to capture. And that's why, they call human beings predators. They behave like that. They target the weaker ones, so it's tough. I started digging into that John Benet Ramsey case. I'm going to be honest. When I was a kid and I heard about it and the way that they put it in the media, everyone thought the parents. Everyone thought the parents. It was very obvious, like where they lived. There was no crime there. These people had money. And so the motivation for being the parents later on, as I discovered, didn't seem likely. Now, I discover in what I'm reading that the Boulder police, they're not cooperating. They're not handing over the DNA. And I think the reason is because there's so little of it and they don't want an outside source to contaminate it or use up all of it. But the person that's wanting to do the DNA testing, she seems to be really with her. Her name's Cece. Like she seems to be on top of things. She's helped bring in a serial killer that was at large for like 40 plus years. And they brought him in 2018 based on some DNA results that she got. And she did it using like an ancestry thing, I believe, to kind of rule out people that in that DNA strand, et cetera. Point I make is, why are they not taking these measures? There's a detective, Lou Smith, and he believed it was an intruder. And the way he looked at the investigation, it spoke intruder. Guarantee, like there was a way to get in the house and commit this crime. And even that note seemed like a last minute, like, act of desperation to try to kind of cover tracks or develop some time for him to run. Like, I think this guy had it in his mind. If I write this letter for the family to see, and it's a ransom, it's going to buy me time to get the hell out of here, right? Because I think this guy was probably like a drifter as an intruder.
Yeah. And actually, I was just reading something about the John Benet case and how not only will the investigators not turn over the DNA, but even the governor has been approached about trying to force them to turn over the DNA, and they haven't responded at all. And it's really weird. You would think, I don't know. To me, it seems like there might be some ego involved.
Oh yeah, definitely. Because clearly the investigation, from what I read about and what I come to learn, is that community, again, not high crime. So the detectives on scene weren't, they're not acclimated to homicide. And so it was very clumsy the way it was approached. I hate to say this, but in the 90s, and not everywhere, obviously some homicide departments in certain cities were equipped and, because they had an expectation there's going to be a lot of homicide. But in the 90s, in some of these places, homicide was like a lot of it was just botched. It was clumsy. And this is a prime example of that. Like the crime scene, the father discovers the body because one of the cops said, why don't you go look around? You know what I mean? Like if it's a crime scene, and someone's missing. We don't know it's a murder this time, but there's a missing young 6-year-old. You're not sending the parents to search the house. You're calling a team in. You're going to evaluate the home from top to bottom and conduct a crime scene, or at the very a proper investigation. And then so the father finds her body, picks her up because, at first didn't realize she was dead, carries her upstairs. And because so here's the funny part. Years ago, when I first learned about this, I was a teen. And I remember seeing the images on TV. It's her body. It's covered by something. It's down where she was initially found dead by the father. I found out that the police put her back down there, right, to conduct at that point, everything's contaminated.
Right.
Everything's contaminated. And of course, they're blaming the parents. And here's the other kicker. It's even now. People are still speculating the father now. The father literally harassed state police, local police, government. He's never stopped the fight. People that are guilty, they might put that act on for a year or two, but I promise after that year or two, they're not concerned with it anymore. This guy's not stopping.
Yeah, and the father still says that, even though technically the family's been exonerated, those detectives still think he had something to do with it all these years later, and that's part of why they don't want to cooperate with the DNA.
Yeah, it's scary because this detective, he's from another jurisdiction, steps in. His name's Lou Smith. He passed away back in 2010, I believe. I think 2010.
Yeah, and his daughter has taken up where he left off, correct?
Oh, I'm not sure. To me, that's great to hear because this should not be when you have DNA and you have modern technology that's hitting in a high percentile for, discovering a murderer. You'd think this would be at the very top of the stack for local police, FBI, everyone involved. The CBI, right? The Colorado Bureau of Investigation. These guys would all collaborate. Say, look, if we could sit down and come to a consensus and say this seems viable, it's working, I don't see what the problem is. It's
right.
I personally believe if a murder goes unsolved for, let's say, 6 months, maybe it's time to bring in FBI and specialists and et cetera, right? Maybe it's time to, set your ego aside. You didn't get it, we'll keep you in a loop, but let's get the big dogs in. That's the attitude I would have anyway. Right.
And it's just really sad that JonBenét's mom, Patsy Ramsey, she died before they could clear her. So this poor woman went to her grave with, investigators in the whole world thinking she had something to do with it. And I just think, at this point, I don't know. I just don't understand, what are they afraid of? You would think such a big case for such a small police department, it would be a win for them to finally get this solved.
Yeah, and the father, he's surrounded by tragedy. I recently discovered that JonBenet had an older sister that died in 1992 in a car accident, like a half-sister.
Yeah.
So, there was just tragedy in this guy's life. And so you could see, I was watching his interview, and I'm pretty good about reading people's faces. Like, I do my best. And you could see he's worn. He's worn down by this. He's never stopped thinking about it. He's never stopped pursuing it. And, like this detective Lou Schmidt, he comes aboard and the first thing he says is like, something's wrong here. Like, he examined it and says it looks like an intruder, and he was basically shunned. Like, they shot his theories down. And so when I hear that, it tells me that someone's out there with a very singular mindset on what happened, and they're not willing to bend what it is they're thinking. And that's not how you should investigate. That's not scientific. It's not the work of a true detective, right? You really want to examine all possibilities. Yeah, it says here, Lou. Wow. They brought him on for a special task force. They brought Lou in as a special, murder task force. And when you hear task force, you think multiple members, right? People with expertise. And all I saw was his name and then the locals. And then I find out the same detectives that were working the case back then are still currently the detectives now.
Right.
So,
and what exactly are they doing if they have DNA? And, we don't know how much of it, maybe it's corroded, we don't know. But, it's like, well, what are they doing to actively investigate the case? And if they're still actively investigating, why not at least try this?
You would think, this isn't like a rare occurrence either, because I'd spoken with Norm Pardo about the OJ case. And I was enlightened about a lot of stuff I didn't know. Example, Glenn Rogers is in the mix here. This is a serial killer who's in prison for murdering a lot of people. In fact, OJ and Nicole, however they came to know him, they didn't know him as Glenn Rogers. They knew him as a name of a man he murdered and took his identity. On top of that, I'm almost, it's mind-boggling because Ron Goldman was a pretty big guy. He was athletic, right?
Right.
He had martial arts in his background. And you could see on his body, he put a fight up. He fought his assailant. And OJ, what he had? He had a cut on his finger. That's it.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
So, and then it was also said that Glenn Rogers, the next day, he was supposed to be a painter, didn't go to work because he wasn't feeling well, which sounds like he had a big fight. And if, hypothetically speaking, if OJ killed Nicole and Ron, they would find a little bit more than just some trace blood. That's a lot, an enormous amount of blood would be on him, his car. There'd be it would not be small traces. So even in that case, I think OJ went to confront Nicole, right? Because there was an alleged drug issue and his kids are around. This guy, Glenn, under whatever name he's using at the time, joins him. And so Ron's unexpected. He had glasses to bring to Nicole, which was, in my opinion, an excuse to see her. And so as they're approaching, Ron's there. OJ and Ron get into a dispute. And Ron was said to pull out a small pocket knife, and it clipped OJ's finger, and OJ just left. And this guy, Glenn, picked up the action. And so clearly Nicole comes out hearing the commotion. I would imagine Ron's down and out, and he turned his attention to her. Now, why didn't this all come out? Why didn't investigators approach this and say, well, why, OJ, tell us? Because OJ really could have said, this guy did it, et cetera, but that was the fear of going to prison. OJ didn't want to go to prison, period. Right. So that the face you saw him on was not the face of a guilty murderer, but it was someone who was guilty because of association. And that incident happened because of him, right? So, because I never thought OJ, even then, I was like, there's no way this guy's a killer, man. You know what I mean? And
I don't know. I'm pretty sold on that. But
yeah, baby, when you listen to the details of this, when you all the information aside, when you hear about Ron's defensive wounds, whoever he fought took an ass whipping. They didn't get away with just clean killing. This guy, he gave it to somebody. So they would have bruising. They would have had abrasions on their skin. It would have been OJ, if he did it, if he was the one to kill Ron, guaranteed he would not just have a cut on a finger. He'd have like a black eye, a fat lip. This guy fought hard. And then Nicole comes out. And so when you look at this guy, Glenn Rogers, and some of the other victims, he killed, outside of him washing the body, killed her pretty similarly. Like you could see it was similar, right? So, and I'm not saying, this is just my opinion on it, but when I hear this is what comes to my mind. And so what troubles me more about any of that is that the LAPD that looked into this, the detectives that looked into this, when you do your work on a homicide, you should not, or it's OJ, period. You can't have a singular mindset. You have to rule out everything. And I think they would have discovered, well, here's this guy under an assumed name, which we later find out is Glenn Rogers, who's a serial killer, and is actually in a photo of one of them and has been witnessed by other people. I'll tell you who the real guilty party is with that scenario. Whoever introduced OJ to that man and Nicole to that man, that's the guilty party, because they didn't, someone somewhere somehow had some idea who this guy was somehow, because if you listen to the rest of it, there was another guy with Nicole's information driving around with a suppressed weapon.
Well, I have to admit, it happened when I was in high school and I watched it, but I have not done a whole lot of looking into it since then. I have to tell you, it's something I would have to really investigate, because I haven't really paid much attention to it since it happened.
Yeah, I invite you to look into that, because I thought the same thing. I'm like, yeah, OJ did this. He's going to get away with it. I thought that for years until I read more information. And then here's the kicker. When you go to look at the files from that, it should be public record, you would imagine, right?
You would think, yeah.
It's sealed. And then there's shit that's redacted. Like, this is, equivalent to the JFK mystery when it comes to sealed information or redacted information. Why is that? And I think largely in part, like we discussed earlier, it's a black eye in law enforcement to let a known serial killer, keep this in mind, had they did their job and investigated this other guy, this guy Glenn would not have gone on to kill the amount of people he killed thereafter, because he killed a lot of people after that. And they eventually caught him. Eventually they caught him. It was on, I believe you could see the video of a reporter with a camera at the moment they captured this guy. he was out killing. So had they done their due diligence and responsibly approached that case, all of those murders he was responsible for, non-existent today. They would have figured out something was wrong. If they would have approached him in that same timeline, if OJ was more forthright, let's be honest, if OJ was more forthright and said, hey, all right, I was with this guy, here's what happened, they probably would have went to this guy, saw the amount of bruising and the condition of him at that moment, and said, holy shit, this guy was in a massive altercation. And then that case would have took a different turn. So it's not just the police that are guilty. OJ's guilty too, because you really, again, had you been forthcoming, who knows? Who knows?
Right. Well, it'll be interesting to see if the person that was arrested for the Idaho murders has any other victims on his body count. Because this guy killed 4 people the very first time he committed this type of crime. That really doesn't make a lot of sense to me or a lot of people.
Yeah, I agree with you. You don't kill 4 people. Again, that's even that other guy. Most people don't just kill 4 people because, hey, it's Friday, I'm bored. It's in right. It's in their DNA. It's in their nature. And so, yeah, that's bizarre. This happened in a sorority, right?
Well, a house. Right. Yeah, sorority house. But it's not beyond the imagination that somebody would kill multiple people their first time. It's happened before. If you look at BTK, for example, Dennis Rader, he killed multiple people the first time, he committed a murder. But it's pretty rare that somebody, the first time they're going to go out and do this, they're going to kill 4 people at once. And so either he's got, a history that the DNA hasn't discovered yet, or this guy was on his way to becoming a serial killer for sure.
Yeah, so I spoke to Lenny DePaul on this show. He's a former U.S. Marshal, former Secret Service, was on the show Manhunters, and he was. They were using him for counsel, right, for advice,
right.
And even he was like, "This, there's no way it's this guy's first time, right?" Because he cleaned up pretty well. There was nothing sloppy done. In other words, it's premeditated. The guy knew he was going to do it.
Yeah.
He approached that with every intention of that being the case. What troubles me, and maybe this is my own mind and my imagination running away, but other people were in that house, right? Mm-hmm. There was people that survived. Somebody, I don't know, how do you kill someone? One of them had to scream. One of them had to make noise. I would have think.
Well,
anyway.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a whole flood of information that's come out just in the past few days, showing that one of the surviving roommates, it was after 4 a.m. and she was in her room and she heard what she thought was somebody say, "There's someone in the house." And she looked out her door and didn't see anything. She went back in her room. A little while later, she heard what sounded like one of the victims, one of the girls, crying and playing with her dog in one of the bedrooms upstairs, and opened her door again, nothing. And then she heard what sounded like a male voice say, "Don't worry, I'm here to help you." And the third time she opened her door, this guy wearing all black with a mask, you couldn't see anything but his eyes. He goes walking by her, just casually walks by her and leaves via the sliding doors.
Huh.
And we'll get into this, but she said she froze. And then she went back in her room and locked herself in her room. But then the 911 call, doesn't come in until hours later. And so this poor girl has been getting so much grief from people who are trying to say that she had something to do with it. The police have cleared her. They said it was just, there really is no explanation for it. Probably we're not going to hear much about that unless it goes to trial, or once, if he, hopefully he'll plead guilty. Supposedly he's not planning to do that, but either after he pleads or after the trial, we'll hear more about it. But the police are saying, look, it was just a shocking thing. There were so many people that were in and out of that house because of parties, and there were multiple people that lived there. It's possible she thought somebody was playing a prank, or maybe it was some sort of hazing incident. Also, we know that they had been at a bar earlier, so she could have been intoxicated. We don't know, but she did see this figure, described his height, which matched up with the suspect, Brian Koberger. She said, the only thing, other than, describing what he was wearing, the only thing she could really make out about him was that he had bushy eyebrows. Brian Koberger kind of has bushy eyebrows. I mean, I think that's kind of a matter of opinion. But there's actually a ton that's linking him back to this case. He really wasn't that smart about it. He left a bloody footprint. He left his DNA on the button of a knife sheath, and they believe that the knife that went into that sheath was the murder weapon. It's a Marine K-bar knife.
Right.
But they haven't been able to find the murder weapon yet. So he left, DNA there, and that's actually how they ended up tracking him and arresting him. And his car, oh my gosh, I can't even, multiple times, his car was seen on surveillance near the residence, and not just the morning of the murder, but 12 times before that. It appeared that he was stalking one or all of them, because, it was always either very late at night or very early in the morning. Cell phone towers and surveillance cameras were picking him up in the area. So, in fact, he left behind so much evidence that it's people are kind of making, a suggestion that maybe he did this just to see if he could get away with it.
I tell you what, a couple things. The girl identifies the eyebrows, so she's coherent enough to see a small detail, right? So inebriation's factored out. At that point,
well, not necessarily. I
right.
mean, it depends on how inebriated she was.
Right. There's a difference between having some drinks and being coherent, and then having drinks and you're non-coherent, period. But to recognize a small detail, especially in dark, and the guy's wearing, basically a mask, he's dressed in all black, and to realize the detail of the eyebrows tells me she was aware that, she was able to see the details of that. I mean, if a guy's walking around my place, I don't give a shit where I am. He's wearing all black and a mask. That flags all day, flags. Two, this guy, if it was his first murders, he, like you said, he's on his way to becoming a career killer, because he was selective. He walked right by this girl, didn't touch her, just left. Either he was out of gas, or he was, like you said, now talking about 12 days, if he's watching him, he selected his targets. Like he knew before he entered that place, he knew full well who it was he was going after, what the plan was, and then departs right, just passing some girl. So definitely that's, serial killers have a preference, right? And they all start somewhere. So I'm sure they're going to dig into this guy and find something. It can't be that he just said, again, I'm going to stab these people. Typically in serial murderers and in people with that kind of behavior, it starts with animals or some odd behavior that's determined early in life. Very
well. Brian Koberger, his background is interesting. He was actually studying, I believe it was criminology, and had studied. He was in the middle of working on his PhD at the University of Washington, Washington State. And he had received a master's degree from DeSales University in Pennsylvania, and he studied under Catherine Ramsland, who is a forensic psychologist. She actually teaches there, and she's written, I want to say, 68 books, and corresponded with Dennis Rader. BTK helped him write his autobiography. Um, so this is why people are sort of sort of wondering if, he was just trying to see if he could get away with it, play mind games a little bit because he was studying all this. And um, his background, he had been a pretty serious heroin addict in high school.
Hmm.
He was very overweight and bullied, and especially by girls. And then his senior year, his friends say he suddenly came back to school like 100 pounds lighter and was rail thin and became super aggressive and became a bully himself.
Huh.
So he does, it appears that clearly he has something going on as far as his mental health is concerned, because people typically don't become heroin addicts for fun.
Right.
But we don't know much about his family. His one of his sisters is a therapist, a mental health counselor. His other sister is a school counselor, and his parents. I don't know much about his parents, but they seem like a nice, normal family. So, but we don't know. That's another thing that we probably won't find out until after, during the trial or after he pleads, whichever happens first. We don't know a whole lot about what went on in his house when he was growing up. So that'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, but let alone that, he's being so prior to his transformation, he's heavy guy, he's being bullied. You could have a very profound effect from being abused by peers, right? Because
Right.
early on in life, one of the bigger things that young people come to terms with is being accepted by their peers and how they're viewed by their peers. And even if it's not true, this has been shown that even if you're an attractive person, you have a good personality, if you're selected for bullying, whatever confidence you had prior to that is evaporated. Unless you're so sure of oneself and you could overcome that, 90% of the time people are going to fall victim to the consensus of everyone around them. That's usually what happens. And so that's a traumatic experience. And then thereafter, we don't know. Like you said, when you move to heroin, you're suppressing something. People that utilize strong opiates or other medications are just they're trying not to cope with some kind of reality, and they're utilizing something to self-medicate.
Right, exactly. And yeah, I think it's interesting. This is just my, I sit and think about, what happened as much as anybody else. And I think it's interesting that his sisters work in the field that they do. And that, Koberger, it seems like he had posted something on Reddit asking people as part of his PhD program, I think it was either the PhD or the master's, asking people who had been incarcerated, before you killed somebody or attacked somebody, what were you thinking? What were you feeling? So it seems like, the sisters are working with people who have these problems, and it seems like he's really exploring
Julie has ran into some technical difficulties. To find her, I will have her blog in description for people to find. For those of you listening, we're going to say good day, good evening, good night, whatever it is for you.